I'm Grace Grogan. Paul Cannon and I live and travel full-time in a motorhome. One of our favorite things to do is drive off-road trails looking for unique photo spots. Today we are driving the Mortero Wash, which is trail number 87 in the Fun Treks Guide to California Backroads and Four-Wheel Drive Trails. The majority of the trail is located in the Anza-Borrego Desert State Park near Ocotillo, California, and has a moderate difficulty rating. Travel with us on a trail that is one of my favorites due to its beautiful scenery and history. The trail begins with a long drive toward the mountains in the distance. The trail widens into a wash, which is a dry riverbed that temporarily flows with water after a heavy rain. The entrance to the trail has a large sign titled The Impossible Railroad. Surveyors nicknamed the San Diego and Arizona Railway the Impossible Railroad because of the jagged mountainous terrain and brutal desert route it would take. The driving force behind the 148-mile railroad was John D. Spreckels. Construction began in 1907 and was completed in 1919. You will see this historic railroad on the trail, and I will share more of its history with you then. The large boulders along the trail were interesting, and we made several stops to photograph them. We came upon a row of 4 boulders that were interesting, and to the left what looked like a road led to the edge of a stream terrace. Stream terraces are developed over hundreds of thousands of years when the river flowed at a slightly higher elevation. Over time, the flowing river eroded the land and lowered the riverbed. The terraces are left standing above what is now the flow level for the river. The scenery and piles of boulders never cease to amaze. Here you see an interesting pile of boulders with piles of smaller rocks in the background to the left and mountains to the right. we continue down the trail, it feels like we are driving through a field of boulders. Some are piled on each other in unusual groupings. It makes you wonder what type of force moved them into their current position so far from the mountains in the distance where they most likely came from. Looking out over the land, you wonder how those large boulders became scattered over the land, and more so, how they became piled on top of each other, forming mountains. These round granite boulders are formed in a process called sporadic weathering. The rocks were formed right where they are when blobs of liquid magma cooled slowly in the ground to form crystalline granite rock. As the rock is uplifted, it begins to fracture in myriad directions. Groundwater travels around the fracture lines and begins to disintegrate the granite. Eventually, a square or rectangular shape begins to form in the granite. As it continues to lift upward, buffering from the wind rounds off the edges and landscape becomes littered with boulders. This trail has a lot of Choya cactus, which are the type that look like small white bushes. There are several varieties of Choya, and I am not certain what type are seen here. You do need to be careful because this cactus is known for barbed spines that will make unyielding grasp to skin, fur, and clothing. This buckhorn Choya was full of buds but had not yet blossomed. We are driving in a wash, and you can see areas of the trail where recent rains have washed out areas of the trail, sometimes leaving large holes along the edge. We arrive at the historic Dos Cabezas Railroad Tower for the first time on this trail. Dos Cabezas was a station on the route of the San Diego, Arizona and Eastern Railway. Dos Cabezas means two heads. The name comes from two head-shaped boulders in the Jacumba Mountains about 1¼ miles across the valley to the southwest. Water towers were essential to railroad transportation and were placed along railroad lines to refill the water tanks in the engine. Water was used in the boilers of steam locomotives. We will be coming back to this location and crossing over to continue the trail, but first we are going to take a short side trip down along the San Diego and Imperial Valley Railroad track. The side trip took us into a wash that flowed from mountains to our left and ran under the railroad trestle. The San Diego and Arizona Railroad was one of the most expensive ever built in the United States, costing almost $19 million in 1919. In the Carrizo Gorge, the railroad crosses 14 trestles and goes through 21 tunnels in one 11-mile stretch. From San Diego to El Centro, California, the railroad rises and falls over 3,700 feet. We noticed there were three options for climbing a hill up ahead. We started up one, then decided to back down and analyze the three. The one to the left, although more rugged, was less steep, and we opted for that route. We started up the hill, then Paul hit the brakes when a pickup suddenly appeared at the top of our hill. He drove on by and, to our surprise, did not come down any of the three trails we had analyzed. As we top the hill, you will see the railroad tracks on our left. section of trail had a lot of jackrabbits. The Antelope Jackrabbit is found in southern Arizona and northwestern Mexico and lives in the dry desert areas. They are a large animal, weighing 8 to 9 pounds and are 16 to 24 inches long. They are fast. They are also very good at hiding behind the foliage back from the trail. Check out the mountains, which look like piles of giant rocks. You will get an even closer look at these farther along on our trail ride. The tall, skinny plant waving in the wind is Ocotillo. It is commonly found along high desert washes, and the tops of the stems have red blooms on them. We have reached the end of our side trail, and we circled around and parked, enjoying the nice open area and scenic view while we ate our lunch. Notice the bizarre cloud, the only cloud in a clear blue sky. We think this may be a contrail, which is formed by aircraft flying through moisture at a high altitude. Driving the same trail in the opposite direction gives a different vantage point, and frequently we notice things we did not see before. When we got to the point where we climbed the hill, we decided to follow the trail in the direction we saw the pickup truck go earlier and hoped it didn't take us too far out of our way. That trail gave us a higher vantage point to view the water tower and trestle as we drove. Look in the distance on the left. The white you see on the horizon is a field of large windmills. You will get a closer look at those later. The water tower is on our right in the distance. We have no idea what this bright orange stuff is. It is part of plants, and we saw it in several spots. In some cases it looked like burnt leaves. It could be seen from quite a distance, and we took several pictures of it. When we got back to the water tower, we debated over what section would be the best to cross. Paul thought one spot a bit farther down the track might be a better option, but it was a rough climb going over. After we had crossed and were headed back on the trail, we saw another vehicle cross close to the water tower. We hadn't noticed a spot where someone built up an area to make crossing easier. Take a look to the left, where you will see the antique water tower in front of the modern windmills in the background. The size of the rocks was increasing, and we found it interesting the way they would pile up and balance on each other, like the one shown on the left. The yellow brittlebush flowers among the rocks are a common wildflower and are scattered throughout the area. They provide a bright flash of color that calls for a closer look. We reached a rocky area on the trail and at first thought we would go through. After closer inspection, we decided it was more than we wanted to tackle without other jeeps and experienced spotters along, so we backed up and found what we believed to be the bypass route. last route looked better, but still required us to traverse over some rocks, so Paul positioned the Jeep to give us more of a straight angle. Here we go! We found a good trail on the other side. This trail and the original trail quickly joined and became one. Check out the huge pile of rocks on the left. This is a red Choya cactus flower. Choya cactus represent more than 20 species in North American deserts. Choya is a term applied to various shrubbery cacti with cylindrical stems and segmented joints that look like branches. As you drive, you wonder when the last time was that the rocks tumbled down the mountain. Looking at the hills and mountains, it looked like a supersized truck had come in and dumped rocks into piles. We have now entered another wash. You can tell by the sandy bottom. Notice how wide the wash is, which means we need to pay attention to make sure we follow the proper trail. We are now heading down the trail slightly. If the river was flowing, it would be coming from behind us. See the hill on the right that looks like a pile of boulders? I told Paul I would not want to be going by during an earthquake. It might be fine, and they have probably been there a lot of years, but oh, what the mind does with the thought. Notice the trees on both sides of the wash. We believe these to be mesquite, which favor growing in desert drainage corridors. They are all leaning forward away from us as we drive. Look at the ground around their trunks and how the water flowing from behind us has scooped out the sand around them. It is amazing how much they have been pushed forward and grow at an angle. This was a tricky point. We crossed the railroad tracks and turned to the left, which has an obvious trail, but the compass reading said we were going in the wrong direction. After referring to the Fun Treks book, we finally decided we needed to turn around and travel with the railroad track on our right. As we make our turn, check out the banks with tracks on the right. Those are created by ATVers having fun. The railroad tracks are now on our right. Our trail book said to watch for illegal immigrants on the tracks, but we did not see anyone. The area is very close to the Mexican border. It is interesting that during the time the railroad was being built, the area endured the Mexican Revolution, a prolonged lawsuit, floods, World War I, labor shortages, a tunnel cave-in, and the lethal Spanish flu epidemic. Notice the large culverts to the right. We drove over to take photos of the scenery looking through them. We are now approaching the large windmills. From the time it began operating, the railroad encountered numerous problems, including rock slides, sand on the tracks, dry rot in bridges, fires that collapsed tunnels, landslides, and hurricane damage in the gorge. Check out the two windmills reflecting in the Jeep hood. Watch as we drive. This happens again in other parts of the trail. At one point along the trail, we stopped and turned off our radio and engine. You could hear the windmills making a soft whirling sound as they turned. We have now approached a stop sign for the railroad crossing, which leads you to believe the railroad may still be active, but the tracks look rarely used. The first passenger train on the Impossible Railroad went from El Centro, California to San Diego in 1919. The last passenger train ran in 1951. In 1976, Hurricane Kathleen did heavy damage in the Carrizo Gorge and the railroad closed, but then opened in 2004 with freight service to Plaster City. A 50-year operating lease ended in 2012 and operations ceased. The last information I found is that as of 2019, talks to reopen were ongoing. This was a perfect place to check out a view of the mountains and the huge windmill field. There is a tremendous amount of energy being generated by wind power. It took quite a while to drive through the Ocotillo Wind Project, which consists of 112 wind turbines covering 12,346 acres of what is mostly federal land administered by the Bureau of Land Management. There is enough energy generated here to power 130,000 households each year. The windmill blades turn at a speed of 6 to 16 revolutions per minute. Generating wind power produces zero emissions and uses virtually no water. Wind power in California saves more than 3.4 billion gallons of water each year and prevents more than 7.8 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions each year, which is equivalent to taking 1.7 million cars off the road. We hope you had fun riding the Mortero Wash with us and learning about the Impossible Railroad. We have now reached the end of the trail and are getting back on the highway. Notice how the windmill field continues across the road and on the other side of the highway. If you enjoy scenic trail rides, join us as we go ridge running through Laguna Mountain, where you will travel with us on a unique lunar landscape. Many thanks to Fun Treks off-road books that guide us on our trail adventures. A big thank you from Paul and I for watching. We hope you enjoyed the ride. Please visit our YouTube channel, Rolling Thru North America Travel with Us. Check back often, give us a big thumbs up below, leave us your comments, and please subscribe.